Protobothrops flavoviridis, commonly known as the Takara habu, is a venomous pit viper endemic to the Amami Oshima Island in Japan.
In the late 1970s, a deadly crisis was gripping the lush, subtropical island of Amami-shima in southern Japan. A paradise of dense forests and rare wildlife had been turned into a place of fear by a venomous predator, the habu snake. This wasn't just any serpent. It was aggressive, unpredictable, and incredibly venomous. Its bite could send a healthy adult into respiratory failure within hours, and without immediate medical intervention, the result was often fatal. In 1 year alone, over 400 people were bitten, and several of them died. And the worst part, island's remote geography made it nearly impossible to store the necessary anti-venom safely. Electricity wasn't reliable in rural areas, and cold storage units were scarce. Many bites occurred in places too far from hospitals, too late for treatment to be effective. So when the Japanese government looked at the mounting death toll and the persistent fear in people's lives, they knew something had to be done. But instead of building more hospitals or developing new anti-venom solutions that would have taken time, money, and massive infrastructure changes, they turned to nature for help. What if they could introduce a natural predator, one that would keep the habu snake population in check without disrupting the ecosystem? That's when the idea of bringing in snake killers, small, fast, and fearless mongooses, merged. On paper, it was the perfect plan. In reality, it was the beginning of an ecological disaster. The mongoose had all the makings of a hero in this story. Small, sleek, agile, and lightning fast, this predator had a long history of battling venomous snakes in places like India and Pakistan. It was known for attacking and killing cobras, and its resistance to snake venom made it a rare kind of biological marvel. The species chosen, the small Indian mongoose, had already been introduced in other regions to combat snakes and rats, and, in some cases, it had even succeeded. Its reflexes were so quick it could dodge a snake's strike midair and counterattack with lethal precision. The Japanese government, confident in their research, released just 30 mongooses into the wilds of Amami-shima in 1979. They expected these animals to naturally seek out and eliminate the habu threat, and as a bonus, they believed the mongooses would also help control the island's growing rat problem, which had been damaging crops and spreading disease. It seemed like a win-win solution. There were no chemicals, no poisons, and no complex technology, just a natural predator being placed in an environment that needed it. What could possibly go wrong? Local residents were hopeful, even enthusiastic. For many, it felt like a return to a simpler, more harmonious relationship with nature. But while the plan made perfect sense in theory, no one had considered what would happen if the mongoose and the snake didn't actually cross paths. And as it turned out, they almost never did. The first signs that something was wrong didn't come right away. The mongooses adapted quickly to their new environment. They were healthy, multiplying, and clearly thriving. But the snake problem hadn't improved. The habu snakes were still there, still dangerous, and still biting people. It took several years before scientists and officials realized the obvious truth: the mongooses weren't killing the snakes at all. And the reason was embarrassingly simple. Mongooses are diurnal. They're active during the day. Habu snakes, on the other hand, are nocturnal. They come out after dark. This meant that the predators and their prey were living completely separate. Lives on the same island, like two tenants, using the same apartment on opposite schedules. They weren't fighting, they weren't interacting, and the plan was falling apart. Even when a mongoose did happen to encounter a snake, it often wasn't worth the risk. Hunting snakes is hard work. It requires energy, precision, and carries the constant threat of a lethal bite. Meanwhile, Amami-shima was filled with easy prey mice, rabbits, nesting birds, and eggs. For a smart predator, the choice was clear. Why fight something that might kill you when there are defenseless animals everywhere you look? The mongooses adjusted their diets accordingly. They ignored the snakes and went after whatever was easiest to catch. It didn't take long for this. preference to start causing massive unintended consequences. The very animals that had once thrived in the island's protected isolation were now being hunted relentlessly, and nobody had prepared for what happened next. Among the first victims were the amami rabbits, small primitive creatures, sometimes called living fossils. These rare animals had survived for millions of years, their ancestors roaming ancient forests long before humans arrived. Today they existed only on two islands in the entire world, Mamishima and Tokunoshima. The rabbits had no natural predators. They had never evolved to hide, run, or fight. They didn't know what to do when the mongoose came. Suddenly, the very animals that had withstood earthquakes, tsunamis, and climate shifts were being wiped out by an invasive species they had no defense against. The mongooses didn't stop there. They started attacking the amami spiny rat, another species found nowhere else on Earth. They climbed trees to steal eggs from nests, eating baby birds before they could even hatch. They hunted reptiles, amphibians, insects, and even fruits. Anything that could be chewed, swallowed, or carried off was fair game. What was once a lush and balanced ecosystem became a battlefield with mongooses at the top of the food chain. Species that had existed undisturbed for thousands of years were suddenly vanishing in the space of just a few seasons. In only 2 decades, the mongoose population exploded from 30 individuals to over 10,000. It was like unleashing an army without a general. With no way to control what they hunted or where they went, scientists were horrified. Birdsong that once echoed through the forests grew quiet. Vegetation patterns changed. Insects began overrunning certain parts of the island because the birds that used to eat them were gone. Nature's careful balance was unraveling at an alarming speed. The plan to control one problem had created dozens of new ones, and now the entire island was under threat. By the early 2000s, it was clear that the mongoose introduction had turned into one of Japan's worst ecological mistakes. What was supposed to be a natural solution had instead created an artificial imbalance with real consequences. Amamishima's unique identity as a biological treasure trove was in jeopardy. Conservationists raised the alarm, calling attention to the shrinking populations of endemic species and the irreparable harm being done to the island's environment. In 2000, the Japanese government officially admitted the mongoose plan had failed. But admitting the mistake was only the beginning. Now they had to fix it. And removing over 10,000 invasive predators from a densely forested island would be no small task. Early efforts focused on simple traps placed along roads and known mongoose paths. But these methods were mostly ineffective. Mongooses are clever. They learn quickly and avoid danger. Most traps sat empty, while the animals continued to spread, unchecked. It became obvious that a more aggressive, organized, and technologically advanced campaign was needed. The government invested heavily in specialized traps, scent-based attractants, and even toxic bait. Surveillance cameras with motion sensors were installed deep in the forests. Trained dogs were brought in to sniff out mongoose dens. Scientists tracked migration patterns. Volunteers hiked for hours through dense, humid terrain just to set traps in the island's remotest regions. It was slow, grueling, expensive work, but the survival of some of the planet's rarest species depended on it. One of the most critical turning points in this battle came in 2005, when a grassroots effort called the Amami Mongoose Busters was formed. This team was no joke. Comprised of dedicated locals, biologists, and trained hunters, they took the fight directly into the heart of the island's wilderness. Over the next several years, they deployed more than 30,000 traps across Amami-shima. The terrain was unforgiving steep hills, dense vegetation, dangerous wildlife, intense heat, but these volunteers persisted. They checked traps daily, cataloged catches, and monitored progress with precision. Every captured mongoose was one small victory in a long and exhausting war. Slowly but surely, the population began to decline. With fewer mongooses roaming the island, amami rabbits started appearing more frequently. Bird calls, once thought lost, began returning to the forests. Scientists noticed positive changes in the population of spiny rats and seed-bearing plants. It would take years, perhaps decades, for the island to fully recover, but for the first time in a long while, hope was on the horizon. The story of Amamishima serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of tampering with nature, even with the best of intentions. It reminds us that every ecosystem is built on fragile relationships that have evolved over thousands, sometimes millions of years. Introducing a new species, no matter how well-studied or seemingly harmless, can have devastating ripple effects. And while it's tempting to look for quick fixes to complex problems, the consequences of those decisions can echo for generations. Today, the mongoose population on Amamishima is dramatically reduced, but the effort continues. Conservationists and government agencies remain vigilant. New technologies are being used to monitor endangered species, and local communities are more involved than ever in protecting their island's fragile biodiversity. The mistakes of the past have not been forgotten, but they've become the fuel for a new generation of environmental stewardship. Amamishima stands today not just as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but as a living reminder of what happens when nature is disrupted and what it takes to heal it. The mongoose was never evil. It was just an animal doing what animals do: survive, reproduce, adapt. The real failure was human hour. Failure to understand that ecosystems are not puzzles we can solve with single moves, but complex, interwoven systems that require humility, patience, and deep respect. In the end, the story of the snake killers is one of tragedy, redemption, and resilience. It shows us that while humans are capable of great harm, we are also capable of great repair. We're willing to listen, learn, and never make the same mistake twice. Even after years of progress, the mongoose busters knew the job wasn't over. Every day, they set out into the thick forests of Amamishima, checking the thousands of traps they had placed across the island. Each trap held the possibility of success or failure. Sometimes, a mongoose was caught. Other times, the trap was empty. But there were always more mongooses hiding somewhere in caves, underbrush, or crevices no human could easily reach. Still, the team pressed on, determined not to let a single survivor undo the years of hard work they had put in. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The once booming mongoose population that had swelled to over 10,000 was dropping fast, shrinking, from thousands to mere hundreds. With each animal captured, hope returned. The changes in the ecosystem were becoming visible. The Amami rabbit, which had once been driven to the brink of extinction, was being spotted more often. Sightings that used to be rare were now becoming common. The forest floor, once eerily quiet, began to hum again with the calls of birds that had previously stopped nesting. Species once considered critically endangered were showing signs of recovery. Nature, left to heal in peace, was beginning to restore itself. Local residents started to notice the difference in their daily lives. They saw rabbits darting through the underbrush. They heard birdsong in the mornings that had been absent for years. But the mission wasn't done. The mongoose busters knew that if even a few mongooses remained, the entire population could rebound, and all their work could be erased. They weren't aiming for reduction. They were aiming for eradication. Every last mongoose had to be removed.
So they kept going.
Day after day, year after year. By 2015, things had shifted. Traps that once frequently caught mongooses were now empty for weeks. Motion sensor cameras showed no signs of activity. Search dogs trained to pick up mongoose scent were coming back with nothing. The island had gone nearly silent in all the right ways. The end was finally in sight. But often, the final stretch of a long journey is the hardest part of all. Then came the moment they had all been waiting for. In April 2018, Amamishima reached a turning point that would make history. The last mongoose was captured. After that, something extraordinary happened. Nothing. No more tracks, no more scent, no more images on motion cameras. The traps stayed empty. The search dogs came up dry. For the first time in decades, it seemed like the mongoose once thought impossible to remove was gone. But no one wanted to rush to conclusions. Scientists and government officials continued to monitor the island carefully. They watched the data roll in month after month, looking for even the slightest sign of a surviving mongoose. And nothing came. It wasn't until 2024, 6 years later, that they felt confident enough to make it official, based on all their monitoring, all the camera footage, the search dogs, the trap results, and the wildlife surveys. They concluded the unthinkable had happened. The mongoose had been completely eradicated from Amami-Shima Island. The Japanese Ministry of Environment made the announcement public. It was a moment of triumph, not just for the island, but for conservation science itself. This was only the 9th time in recorded history that a mongoose population had been fully eradicated after being introduced to a new environment. And of all those cases, Amami-Shima was the largest island where this feat had ever been achieved. To fully appreciate the scale of the achievement, consider this. Over the course of the eradication effort, approximately 32,000 mongooses were captured. That's more than 1,000 times the number that were originally released. What started as 30 animals had multiplied into tens of thousands, and yet, through decades of commitment and strategy, every last one had been removed. The cost of the program was enormous. Millions of dollars were spent in advanced traps, surveillance cameras, specially trained dogs, and the salaries of dozens of dedicated experts. But when weighed against the cost of doing nothing, the total destruction of a unique ancient ecosystem, the expense was worth every yen. The Mongoose Busters, a group once doubted by many, had become heroes of environmental protection. Their work hadn't just removed a predator, it had given an entire island a second chance. The success of the mongoose eradication was more than just a scientific milestone. It was a symbolic victory for a place and a people who refused to give up. It wasn't just about removing an invasive species, it was about bringing the land back to life. Environment Minister Ito Shintaro spoke at the time of the final announcement and summed it up simply. Tenacious efforts were key to the eradication's success. The operation had taken nearly 20 years of non-stop work, persistence through setbacks, and constant adaptation, but it worked. And now, the strategies and technologies pioneered on Amami-Shima are being used as a model for other islands around the world facing similar threats from invasive mongoose populations. The knowledge gained here didn't just stay on the island, it became a global resource. Places once uncertain about how to combat the damage caused by invasive predators now had a blueprint for action. But even in victory, the story offers a sober reminder. The original reason mongooses were introduced in the first place, to fight the habu snakes, never actually panned out. The snakes weren't wiped out by predators. Instead, the real progress came from people taking better precautions and from medical science improving access to antivenom. By 2020, the number of snake bites on Amami-Shima had dropped to just 60 per year. And there hadn't been a single death from a habu bite since 1992. In other words, the solution to the snake problem came not from nature, but from people being smarter, more cautious, and better prepared. The mongooses didn't solve the problem, they failed. But their introduction created a disaster that took a generation to fix. The true solution was slower, harder, and more human. Now, the experience of Amami-Shima is a case study for the rest of the world. It shows how even well-meaning interventions in nature can go. It's terribly wrong when we act without fully understanding the consequences. It's a lesson in humility. Introducing one new species to fix a problem might sound smart on paper, but nature doesn't work like a math equation. Every ecosystem is a complex web of relationships evolved over thousands or millions of years. Change just one element without understanding the rest, and the entire system can collapse. But the story also carries hope, because even after making a massive mistake, people didn't turn away. They didn't give up. They worked together, scientists, locals, government officials, to repair the damage. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But it worked. And now, that success is being used to protect other islands, other animals, and other ecosystems around the world. What do you think of this incredible journey? Have you ever heard of a time when trying to solve one problem ended up creating an even bigger one? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story of survival, determination, and redemption, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.